Hey guys, Aaron Dorr here at the New York State Firearms Association. A lot going on this week and right now in the fight for the Second Amendment here in New York State. You guys all know we filed a massive federal lawsuit against Kathy Hochul last week, the lead plaintiff of whom is State Senator George Borrello. George joins us today live from, we'll call it your mobile office today, George, on the road. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, it's good to be with you. Thank you. It's obviously things get worse and worse in New York State as we have a governor who's bound and determined to strip away all of our rights and become really a dictator. But unfortunately, that's just who New York State is. It is led under one-party rule by people that are bound and determined to turn us into a banana republic ruled by a dictator.
Well, Senator Borrello, you were the lead sponsor on our Stand Your Ground law legislation in Albany. You're the lead of the Second Amendment caucus, we'll call it, in the state Senate. You're a leader in the fight for gun rights. And that's why when I called you and said, hey, George, we got to sue Kathy Hochul, I think your reaction was, sign me up. So this lawsuit was filed last week, but you're also suing Hochul on other issues. So the courts these days are an avenue that we should be pursuing. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's the last bastion here in New York State for us to ensure that our basic rights and freedoms will be upheld because, the Democrats which run New York State will easily trample on all of our freedoms. Even when they know what they're doing is unconstitutional, they continue to do it. And these ridiculous laws right now to make us have to do a background check for ammunition is a perfect example. They know this is completely unconstitutional, but they do it through the arrogance of power and one-party rule here in New York State.
So the update right now then for all of our members is the lawsuit was filed last week, Wednesday. The same day the law took effect on Wednesday, we dropped a federal lawsuit in the Western District. But now, because so many of these stores can't sell ammo because the database doesn't work, we filed for an emergency injunction asking the court to block the enforcement of this law pending the outcome of your lawsuit, Senator Borrello. Right now it's kind of one of those deals where there's the constitutional argument. There's also the practical fact that the database just doesn't work for a lot of people across the state. And right now, that is the only way that law-abiding New Yorkers can buy ammo is to comply with the database. And it simply flat out does not work. So right now we're pursuing both the lawsuit and the injunction. But, a lot of people keep asking us, I'm curious to your thoughts, Senator. The Supreme Court case from last year with Bruin was very clear. All gun control laws must show a historical precedent to be deemed constitutional. There is zero precedent for registering ammo sales here in New York or anywhere else. But your point, I think you're 100% correct, is that Hochul, in her mind, she is the supreme being of not just New York State, but everywhere. She runs the show. Supreme Court be damned. Constitution be damned. She'll do it no matter what. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We saw this obviously start in the pandemic under Andrew Cuomo. And now, she has stepped into his footsteps quite nicely in trying to continue this dictatorial leadership. That's why we sued her against the illegal isolation and quarantine rules of the Department of Health. The whole idea that without any due process, without any proof, someone can be pulled from their homes and moved to a quarantine camp. And this law right now that was passed, by the way, a decade ago, this is really part of the SAFE Act. And now they're implementing this nearly a decade later because they haven't been able to figure it out. And they still haven't figured it out. But I think it's by design. They want this system to fail. They want people not to be able to exercise their constitutional rights or Second Amendment rights by going in and buying ammunition. This is by design. The system failed on day one. We all saw signs hanging that people could not buy ammunition because the state system was down. So this is the only way they can do it. Let's face it. My colleagues on this side of the aisle, most of the Democrats, and certainly the leadership of the Democratic Party in New York State, if they could just ban law-abiding citizens from owning firearms, from exercising their rights, they would. And quite frankly, that's what they've done. But instead of doing that outright, they've created a system that's so cumbersome, so difficult, and obviously so flawed that in effect that is what is happening, and that's why finding this temporary restraining order was a critical part of this because literally on day one, the system failed.
Yeah, I myself walked into two retailers in Ontario County. One was Runnings and one was Walmart. I wanted to see for myself personally And both times it said, sorry, man, we'd love to sell to you. Our database is down. It's been down for a day and a half. We can't sell any firearms. That's the key thing, too. Not just ammo, but firearms. And we can't sell ammo. Come back in a day or two. The other thing, too, we're seeing, Senator, is that a lot of retailers are getting the database works, but it's delayed. And so we're having a lot of retailers who they process a transaction at 10 a.m. They don't get an actual answer until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, by that time, the guy who wanted to buy the ammo has gone. He's left. The retailer then gets hit with the transaction fee. And what's worse is that there's no cancel button. So the database believes that you bought the ammo when you never actually did. So like you said, this was designed to fail on purpose. The criminals get almost a rubber stamp here from bail reform disasters and their overall policies. But you, me, and all of our members, we're the criminals if we don't go through her background check to buy ammo. It's an intentional action.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And let's keep in mind one thing. On one hand, the Democrats want to stop law-abiding citizens from exercising their rights. Now, some people say that's good. I'm glad you can't buy ammunition, but it's not stopping criminals because criminals don't follow the rules.
Yes.
We know that better than 95% of crimes using a gun are done with illegally possessed firearms.
Yes.
What happens in New York State when a career criminal is caught with an illegally possessed firearm? You know what happens? They get an appearance ticket.
Yep.
Let's say that same career criminal gets caught with another illegally possessed firearm. You know what happens? They get an appearance ticket. And it happens over and over and over again because of the criminal coddling laws the Democrats have passed until that criminal finally uses that weapon to commit a crime. Then all of a sudden, that's too late. So, on one hand, we're going to let the criminals run free and use, the illegally possessed firearms over and over again with reckless abandon. That's okay for the Democrats because that's some kind of twisted social justice agenda of theirs.
Yep.
Well, law-abiding citizens want to defend themselves, want to use their firearms. They are the enemy. They are the enemy of the state.
They made that very clear when you had committee hearings this past session on our stand your ground law. It's like somehow you are the criminal, you're the thug, you're the criminal. We are for pushing for legislation to simply say there's no need to retreat before we use a firearm in a defensive situation. Everything about their structure is designed to protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding New Yorkers. That's always been that way. Senator, a lot of folks are frustrated with the court process here in New York State, or more importantly, at the national level, because they say, well, we win some, we won Bruin, but it takes so dang long. And I agree with that. But I guess from my perspective, there has never been a better time in my lifetime for us to fight in court. We have more pro-gun judges now on the federal bench and the Supreme Court than any time in my lifetime. Bruin was an example of that. So I get it, there's a delay here, but now is the time to be doing this in court. I'm actually quite fired up about this.
Well, I also want to thank you, and everyone that has stood up to defend our constitutional rights, because the last bastion that we have, especially here in New York State, is the court system. And we're going to have to fight that fight every day in order to preserve our basic constitutional rights, which is why you see what's happening. But, there's also another solution here, and I would urge all your listeners to talk to their friends who are gun owners that don't vote.
Yes.
At the end of the day, that's the big, here in New York State, if you want to swing things, if you want to end one party rule, if you want to restore our basic rights and freedoms, there's more of them than there are of us. The problem is that so few gun owners as a percentage actually vote. If you own a firearm, if you're a sportsman, if you're just someone who loves freedom and you aren't registered, you're not vote, I don't want to hear the excuses.
That's
you
very
need to register,
true.
you need to vote. Otherwise it's going to take years. It's going to take years just to ensure that these cases, and it costs a lot of money. Let's not, there is no free ride when it comes to suing the state government, which has all of our money to work with, by the way.
Yep.
We won our isolation and quarantine lawsuit in the state Supreme Court. And then, the governor and the attorney general with our money is appealing that lawsuit.
Sure.
If they lose again, they'll appeal it again. But that's the real solution here, folks, is we have to get those folks who are law-abiding citizens who wish to exercise their basic fundamental rights. You need to register, you need to vote. And that's the only way we're going to change things.
That's a very good point, and kind of a follow-on point to that. There's a long time in the gun rights community here in New York State where people kind of say, well, I don't own an AR-15, so the SAFE Act doesn't apply to me, or I don't have a high-capacity magazine, so-called, so SAFE Act doesn't apply to me. And there's been a division, I think, at times in the gun rights community as to when they should engage. But we have now seen the end game for Kathy Hochul. This ammo registration does not care if you're a dove hunter, if you have a gold inlaid side-by-side $80,000 shotgun, or if you have a .22 rifle worth $200. The ammo registration law applies to all of us evenly, and we have got to, all of us, stand up against this right now, because I think people also believe that New York has taken all they can take, that all the freedom is gone. But as we see every day in Albany, there's always more gun control they could enact.
There's no doubt about it. And let's remember, this is death by 1,000 cuts, okay? They start with something small that they think the majority of people can agree to, and then they build off of that. And that's where we are right now. We've seen, starting with the SAFE Act and every other, gun-grabbing law since then. It may not impact you, but you cannot look. If you look at all of the great dictatorships throughout history, the tyranny that we've seen, it's what happens is people start with, well, you know what, that affected my neighbor, but it didn't affect me, so I'm okay. But eventually they come for you. Eventually, your freedom, our rights are going to be sacrificed so that they can maintain power. And that's what's going on right now. So everything we've discussed today, it's all about, do you value the Constitution? Do you value the fact that millions of Americans have fought to protect that Constitution, and you are going to let that slip away for political rhetoric?
Exactly. I think for everybody watching right now, one of the things you can do today, just to be honest, is you can donate. We have the senator here as our lead plaintiff. We have David DiPietro from the Assembly. We have great guys on this lawsuit, but NYSFA is alone in funding this lawsuit. So guys, now is the time to stand up and join this fight today financially. Put yourself in this position now, because if we don't fight these fights today, there's nothing left to fight for a decade or so down the road. And also, I believe, Senator, we're New Yorkers, but to me, we're fighting here not just for New Yorkers, but for the country, because New York State, unfortunately, we're the bellwether cow these days when it comes to gun control. We're far worse even than California. So what happens and becomes law here today follows across the East and West Coast about 10 years later, or in this case, it could be 2 or 3 years later. This fight is about more than just us here in New York.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, what happens here does spread like a cancer across New York State, especially when you start talking about something like this, which is a federal lawsuit that can set precedents across the state. I know a lot of people believe, I'm just going to pack my bags and I'm going to leave New York and I'm going to move to Florida, I'm going to move to Texas. That's a temporary solution at best. But we have to stay here. We have to fight, not just for New Yorkers, but for freedoms across this nation, because you're absolutely correct. What happens here spreads, and eventually there's going to be no place to hide. And that's why it's important for folks to support not just this lawsuit, but everything that we do to protect our freedoms right here in New York State.
Oh, that's very well said. Well, folks, that's where things stand today. The lawsuit's been filed. The injunction request has been filed. We hope to hear back in a couple of days from the judge if he's going to take oral arguments on the TRO process. Much more to come. As always, Senator, thank you for your time. And folks, we'll keep you all informed. Take care.
Thank you.